My name is Keila Cone-Uemura, and I am a bookseller at SKYLIT Books. And today I am so excited to welcome to the show Eileen Giselle, who will be talking about her upcoming book, Lipstick, which is part of the Object Lessons series. Eileen Giselle is teaching professor of college writing at Washington University of St. Louis. She is also the film critic for the Hopkins Review, an award-winning literary and culture magazine published by Johns Hopkins University. Her writing has appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Baffler, Jacobin, Los Angeles Review of Books, Current Affairs, Film Quarterly, and Hyperallergenic, among other publications. In 2023, she received the Rapkin Prize in Arts Journalism. Object Lessons is a series of short, beautifully designed books about the hidden lives of ordinary things. And in Lipstick, Eileen reconsiders the beauty world's most conspicuous and contentious tool of artifice, exploring how self-adornment can be a source of play, pleasure, and transformation, as well as how lipstick can knock gender norms off balance. Lipstick will be available in paperback on February 19th.
All right, welcome to the show, Eileen. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
We are very, very excited to have you. So first, we were just talking about this, your background. Your published work is largely poetry. I know that there were some essays, film criticism. I would love to hear how you got started writing.
Would you like to know more about this book, how I got started writing this book, or writing in general?
Writing in general, and then I would love to hear about the transition from the writing you were doing before into this full book of nonfiction.
I've had a background that is both academic and creative. When I first finished college, I went straight into a PhD program studying film theory and English, but I was pretty miserable in the PhD program for a number of reasons. And so I dropped out of the PhD program in upstate New York. And at that time, I was also writing a lot of poems. And so I applied to a lot of MFA programs, and I ultimately got my MFA at Washington University in St. Louis. I studied poetry with Carl Phillips and Mary Jo Bang. And so poetry and language itself, and the lushness of language, the surprise of language, the playfulness of language, these facets of writing are what have long thrilled me as a writer. But at the same time, I'm somebody who's always gravitated towards the visual. And I think in a lot of ways, my poetry is relatively cinematographic. Like, I think that in some ways it's very informed by my work as a film critic. So for the last 10 years, I've published most frequently as a film critic and as an art critic, as a visual art critic. So I write quite a bit about museum and gallery shows, and I write quite a bit about film festivals and mostly art films, documentaries, and international films. But occasionally I'll write about a huge film. Like I wrote about Barbie, which would surprise no one. But I think one of the things that I see as connecting, what I would see as connecting all of these types of writing is a curiosity about gender and a curiosity about sexuality and power, because I see those themes showing up a lot in my poetry, but I also see those themes obviously showing up a lot in my film and visual art criticism. And so for me, when I thought about writing an Object Lessons book, which is the Object Lessons is the series that Lipstick is a part of, when I thought about writing one of those books, the very first object I thought of was lipstick. And I was frankly shocked that no one else had written an Object Lessons book about lipstick before, because it's such an iconic object and it provokes so many competing emotions and ideas.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Truly iconic. What was the transition like moving from the poetry and the style of writing and thinking that requires into this project?
That's a great question. When I wrote this book in 2024, I wasn't actually writing poetry very actively. I had a book come out of poetry, my book Franco Filaments, which is inspired by Francophilic film or Francophile film, really, like films that are in the French language, both Canadian films, French films, Belgian films, things like that. That book was written in 2023. In 2024, I was writing predominantly prose and cultural criticism that was responding to film and visual art. So writing about beauty culture and writing about lipstick history, in a lot of ways, I was taking a lot of the same skills that I use as a film critic and a visual art critic, and I was just applying them to beauty advertising, beauty marketing, both contemporary and in the past. So it didn't feel like the style of writing didn't feel like a shift, because I've written and published mostly cultural criticism over the last decade. And I think that my style is informed both by what I hope is intellectual rigor and really a deep intellectual curiosity, but also playful, also self-deprecating. I think this book more than most of my writing in prose does have like moments that are anchored in personal narrative. And if anything, I feel like the personal narrative was the part that felt the riskiest for me, because of the fact that I don't primarily publish personal essays. Most of my essays are in third person and kind of taking on that voice of God authority, maybe a playful voice of God authority, nevertheless, a kind of voice of God authority. So incorporating first person intermittently was a challenge, but it was also really fun. So I tried to mingle some of that analytical acumen with personal divulgence and story.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think you were successful in mingling those two.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. I also really appreciated the inclusion of all the different voices and the other lived narratives and like personal memories that people had in association with lipstick.
Mm-hmm.
Was that an element that you knew from the beginning you wanted to include?
When I wrote the book proposal, I predominantly wrote it around the books that had already been written about lipstick. And the books that had already been written about lipstick, the ones from the 20th century, a lot of them felt really fluffy to me and not particularly rigorous. And they also made a lot of like generalizations about gender, sexuality, femininity. And I felt like a lot of the generalizations were no longer relevant to the 21st century, especially some of the changes I've seen in the last decade. So that was maybe a catalyst for writing the book, is feeling that a lot of other books about lipstick were dated. I will say Eileen Carter's book on lipstick, it's more of a history of lipstick in the United States. It's called The Red Menace. That book is excellent, but it is much more focused on history. So like I knew that I wanted to do something more contemporary than that, but that book was really helpful. But to your point about the different voices, because lipstick is so contentious in so many ways, I really wanted the book to be undergirded or to be open to those who dislike lipstick, those who have ambivalent attitudes towards lipstick, those who are much older than me, those who are much younger than me, those from different religious backgrounds, those from different ethnic and racial backgrounds. So I wanted the book to be one where I learned a lot in the process of writing it and researching it. And so I don't know if it was from the very beginning, but fairly early on, the summer of 2024 was when I started writing the book. And that was also when I distributed surveys. And I distributed them broadly with the idea that the surveys would be something that I wouldn't make any quantitative deductions from. I wasn't distributing surveys to kind of, I don't know, aggregate data and figure out like, okay, what does Gen Z think? What do trans women think? What do white Gen Xers think? Like I wasn't thinking about it in that way. I was more thinking about where can I gain like insight from people who are not me and who have different experiences. And so that what I did after distributing the survey is for those recipients and those people who filled it out who had really interesting answers, I would often contact them with follow-up questions. And then it started a conversation Sometimes it was about lipstick stigma. Sometimes it was about race and some of the ways in which race can intersect, or cultural heritage can also intersect with certain conceptions of how to wear lipstick or beauty culture in general. So I think the surveys were really instrumental in terms of broadening the book out and really honoring the fact that there are a lot of valid perspectives on lipstick. I think really all perspectives on lipstick are valid insofar as they are grounded in personal sensual experience. Like lipstick is a sensual thing. We put it on our mouths. We wear it on our mouths, and our mouths are an orifice that, communicate and that suggest so much about our emotional state at any given moment. So it makes sense that, putting something on your mouth on full display to the public in a lot of cases, that it would be so personal, that it would be so, in some ways, sensitive. So I felt really honored that so many women, especially, and a few non-binary people as well, filled out the survey, but that so many trusted me insofar as they shared their stories. That was really important to me. And then 4 of those stories, 4 women, 4 different generations, I asked to handwrite certain parts of their stories so that the book could also be separated with their handwritten narratives. Because handwriting is an amazing way to kind of show generational differences, to show a little bit of personality in some ways, in a different way than just the words on their own.
Mm-hmm. I loved the presence of those handwritten notes. I think it really grounded the different sections in an interesting way.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
What was your research process like with this? Like, how did you figure out where to even begin? It's such a huge...
Yeah, I mean, I first looked for books. Because I didn't want to write a book that repeated what other books had already done. So I did the thing that I tell my students to do, which is, do research so that you can know how to do something new and how to contribute something new. So I had a pile of books that I consulted. I had both scholarly literature on lipstick. Some of it was more historical in nature. So, for example, I read and considered different perspectives on Victorian attitudes towards sex and lipstick, and how lipstick stigma was connected to sex work stigma. I did research on lipstick bans throughout history. I did research on like the oldest extant lipstick and like how it was recently found. And so like I tried to connect contemporary events to a certain level of historicity, but I did focus more or less on the last 40 plus years, in part because I'm in my 40s, and I felt like in the last 4 decades, there have been so many changes in so far as femininity is either celebrated or maligned. And I've witnessed these changes firsthand. So I felt like focusing on the history of the last 40 years might be especially helpful, so that women who are in their 50s or 60s can learn from women who are in their 20s. And similarly, women in their 20s or 30s can learn from women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So that was also a goal for me. So even though the book has some history from like the Victorian age or even earlier, most of the history in the book is relatively recent, like the last 40 years. And then I have sections that are really more focused on the contemporary age. Like the last chapter focuses pretty much solely on Gen Z and shifting attitudes towards femininity and gender.
Were there any rabbit holes that you went down that you had to cut for page count or clarity?
I'm trying to think of one in particular. I feel like, I could have gone deeper into the rabbit hole of like, what is the difference between facial adornment that is based on pigment or painting the face versus plastic surgery and versus filler. I have a short section devoted to lip filler. What's different about lip filler in a way of enhancing the lips versus lipstick? Like what are the, I guess, philosophical implications? What are the political implications? I could have gone down a real rabbit hole there because there's so much to say. I also feel like I didn't realize the extent to which sex work stigma and cosmetic stigma were linked. So I feel like if I had wanted to write a more historical book that had more history in it, I could have gone down that rabbit hole big time as far as sex work stigma and the conflation of conspicuous facial adornment such as lipstick with sex work. So that was something that really fascinated me, but I didn't, and I definitely address it in the book, but I don't go in deep. Maybe a future book I'll do something with that, but this one I don't go in deep.
Oh my God, I would read that book so fast because.
Oh, well, it's good to hear that. That's good to hear that. I mean, I'm thinking about my next book being about glamour, and glamour being connected to sex work, and also glamour being connected to the idea of deception or magic. Because I think that glamour has a lot of negative connotations that are fascinating and in a lot of ways connected to sexuality and gender. So that might, if I have the opportunity to write another book, that would be probably what it's about.
Well, you would have an immediate audience of me for that.
Good. That makes me so happy.
Yeah. Oh my God. So much about what you just said is interesting to me because I was also immediately so drawn to the ideas of artifice and like how conspicuous something is. And also with the comparison of pigment to plastic surgery, the idea of like how permanent something is in relation to like virtue and like femininity and all these performances of femininity. Yeah, there's just so much there that I want to talk about. Maybe because of the bringing up of plastic surgery and how quickly these beauty trends change, I'm interested in, I feel like this sort of all happened probably post-publication of this book, but like the Mar-a-Lago phase and the role that lipstick and artifice play politically. I know you touched on that in multiple sections of the book, but I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
I'm glad you asked this because I want to foreground the fact that I wrote this book before Trump returned to office. So the book was finalized early January as far as the actual content. Had I written the book in 2025 as opposed to 2024, it would probably be a different book in certain ways because I probably would have been more attuned to the ways in which, lipstick and self-adornment was already political in a lot of ways. But I think that in the past year, especially insofar as feminine aesthetics are concerned, lipstick has become more politicized because of the way in which the Mar-a-Lago face has become this conservative archetype and has become something that many women, I think, justifiably want to define themselves against. Like, I don't want to look like that. I don't want to look like kind of configured in this very predictable, homogenous way, because I think of the Mar-a-Lago face as being quite predictable and as being quite homogenous, in addition to requiring a lot of procedures and plastic surgery. So I wouldn't say that in general I'm necessarily like anti-plastic surgery, because I don't think I am. I think I see a lot of beauty and adornment as like value neutral, as not like morally good or morally bad. So from the outside, I want to say that I'm not in the book aiming to finger wag or to moralize about plastic surgery. That being said, Keila, I do feel like with the Mar-a-Lago face, part of what concerns me about it is how prescriptive it is and how rigid it is and how boring it is. So to me, when an aesthetic becomes fairly obligatory and homogenous, it is no longer an expressive aesthetic that I personally find particularly interesting. And so for that reason alone, the Mar-a-Lago aesthetic saddens me. If that makes sense. Like,
Yes.
So, but I will say, there's a wonderful podcast in Britain. Nicola Bon is the host. It's called Outspoken Beauty, and I hope to be on Outspoken Beauty to discuss the book in a few months. She recently posted something about how she's saddened by the fact that so many young women in London are rejecting a heavy eye or rejecting bright lipstick because they're afraid of being affiliated with Mar-a-Lago face. And that the resistance to Mar-a-Lago face is so fierce, is so vehement, that some women are just eschewing any bright makeup, even if otherwise they would enjoy it. So I feel similarly to Nicola Bon insofar as I don't think that all bright makeup approximates Mar-a-Lago face at all. Like I don't know. You can see me right now. I've got a bright lip. I've got some bright eyeliner on. I don't think anyone would mistake me for a Floridian conservative.
Absolutely not. No.
Do you see what I'm saying? So I feel like, but I think it's interesting how quickly aesthetics can become politicized and how quickly someone could try to define themselves against it. And I do think that part of what I find appealing about lipstick and what I find appealing about cosmetics that are temporary is that I feel like they announce their own artifice. They announce the fact that they're artificial. They're not trying to come across as natural. And I think that to some extent, equating or conflating femininity itself with nature, it opens up a huge can of worms. And in a lot of cases, it can also be connected to really conservative attitudes that are biologically essentialist that suggest, oh, well, this woman is a real woman because of being born with certain chromosomes or being born with certain anatomy. But this woman is not a real woman because she wasn't born with these biological assets, so to speak. And I really want to reject that. I think nature, when it comes to femininity and celebrating femininity, I think that nature is totally overrated. I'm not a pro-nature when it comes to considering femininity. And I think that there's so much rhetoric in beauty culture, but also in politics that conflates femininity with nature. And in a way that I think has some really harmful ramifications politically. So I think that informs my celebration of artifice. That informs my approach to makeup and cosmetics being kind of declaratively fake, if that makes sense. Like they're not, it's temporary, it's artificial. There's no pretense that this is like, this is what I actually look like without the makeup. But I also feel like the way that we present ourselves in the world is always shaped by performance, always. So I don't really believe in like the bare face, the natural face being the truer face, for example, being like a truer reflection of who somebody is. As I write in the book, I genuinely feel that my face reflects me more genuinely after I do a few things. It's not to say I am ashamed of my bare face. I just don't feel like it really reflects me as much because I haven't creatively intervened to accentuate the parts of my face that I want to be accentuated. And I think that that's part of what's interesting about makeup too, that is often overlooked, is that cosmetics can really be a form of creative expression. They are not necessarily a form of creative expression. And I think that's also coming back to Mar-a-Lago face. I don't think a Mar-a-Lago face is particularly creative at all. So there's that.
Yeah, it feels like a show of deference.
Yes, exactly. It feels like something that is conforming to an extraordinarily rigid and in many cases racist definition of beauty.
Yeah, and as you were speaking just now, the idea of the natural face and some ideal natural form of femininity is also so rooted in white supremacy. And
oh my God, 100%. That's another rabbit hole. Honestly, that's another rabbit hole I could have gone down because especially in the late 19th century, in the early 20th century, where we have the rise of eugenics, which I'm sure you're familiar with, at the same time we have this and we have Victorian literature extolling white beauty and white femininity and connecting white beauty and white femininity to virtue, and then connecting virtue to beauty, a lot of it is eerily similar to some of the clean girl rhetoric that is really popular today, or has been popular in the last decade. But I also feel like it's no coincidence that a lot of this rhetoric became really popular in the United States at the exact same time that we had so many immigrants coming in, and definitions of beauty really being actively challenged in public space by so many people who were not white in the traditional definition of white. And of course, back then that included Jewish people, it included Italian people, it included, in some cases, Irish people. So the idea that a lot of these conflations of nature with beauty, with virtue, that grab bag of like references is rooted in a lot of Victorian era white supremacy, and also eugenics in a lot of ways. So that's fascinating to me in so many ways, because I feel like it really helps one understand why and how the idea also of not wearing makeup often has a kind of moral valence, if that makes sense. Like, I can't tell you, Keila, I can't tell you how many times like I've been putting makeup on in a public restroom, and another woman, usually an older woman, will say to me, "Oh, sweetie, you don't need that," and kind of intervenes in this maternalistic way. And it makes me a little bit sad, because I know it's coming from a good place, and I know it's coming from lived experience that is genuine. But it's so presumptuous, and it feels misaligned with what I'm doing in that moment. So yeah, I think that there's this idea though that still persists, that like, if you don't wear makeup, that you are more serious, that you are more intellectual, that you are more substantive, that you are more political, that you have your heart and your mind in a place that matters, because God forbid you invest any thought at all in something as superficial as the surface of your face. I mean,
right. Or any time at all.
Exactly. Which I just feel like human beings have always been interested in our surfaces. Always. For so many reasons. Like, this is not something that's even historically a feminine practice. It's been feminized, but it hasn't historically always been a feminine practice. So I think the desire to paint ourselves, to tattoo ourselves, to shave ourselves, to dye ourselves, I mean, like, this obviously is not natural. I'm gesturing to my hair right now, which is platinum. Like, all of this, it's not about, I feel like, yes, it can absolutely have connections to courtship and patriarchal expectations. I'm not trying to say that that isn't part of it. It is, of course. But there's so much more than that. And I think that's something that sometimes especially feminists don't see that. And I think that part of what I hope my book does, I hope my book encourages women who either feel like they cannot identify as feminist because they love beauty culture so much, realize that they can, or women who identify as feminist and reject beauty culture as being automatically patriarchal or automatically self-sexualizing, that maybe they reconsider it a bit. Maybe they just pause and reconsider that.
I think that is something that you're doing really well in this book, is complicating what is so often flattened into very black and white, antiquated ideas of what makeup means. Because even just, there was a section where you were discussing how the red lip across different races carries such different meaning.
Exactly.
You know?
And that's something I didn't know. I didn't know anything about South Asian dance until someone, actually 3 or 4 women across generations, mentioned South Asian dance. And I think it's called, and I might mispronounce the name because this is one of those things where I've written it many times, but I haven't actually spoken about it. But I think it's called like Bharanatam or something like that. When several women mentioned it, I looked into it, and like red lips mean something different in South Asian culture. They're often aligned with marriage. They're often connected to coming of age. They're a rite of passage, if you will. They're incorporated into dance sometimes to represent that rite of passage. And by no means am I an expert. Okay. I'm not an expert on this, but I did learn about that. And then of course for, Latinx women and for Black women, the fact that those women in the United States have in a lot of cases been hypersexualized means that red lipstick can in some ways kind of be part of that and be a reason why some Black women and some Latina women are more cautious about representing themselves that way. But then there are also all sorts of lipstick legacies and traditions within Black culture and within Latinx culture that are conducive to embracing a red lip. Escaramuza is, I think, one of the examples, like the female equestrian sporting event that is really popular in parts of Texas and parts of Mexico. Like my friend Marcela Fuentes, an extraordinary novelist, she was one of the participants who filled out the survey, and her image is in the book, which makes me so happy. The first time she wore red lipstick was when she was performing on a horse, as you know, I think she was 10 at the time, as part of Escaramuza. So like, that's amazing. Like that's a story. That's a connection to lipstick that I didn't know about. And of course, for Black women as well, there are stigmas that are connected horrifically with like the history of blackface and caricatures. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, one of the things that disquieted me was that one of my students, who's 25 now, upon reflection shared with me that one of the reasons why she shies away from wearing bright red lipstick is because she's aware of that connection to blackface, or to the idea of like making fun of full lips that belong to Black women specifically. And so I had no idea, this is not something I knew. So there's a whole chapter to the book that is devoted to women of color. And it's not comprehensive. I don't include in every culture because I had a limited amount of space, but I did want to include stories that show that, okay, like even what we conceive of as what red lipstick means in the United States or in Western culture, that's often a whitewashed vision of what red lipstick means. It's not what it means. It's not what it means overall.
Well, it was so jarring to see those descriptions right after you had included the Snow White description of the skin white as snow, lips red as blood. Because I remember hearing that as a little kid too, and it was like always a positive.
Yes, absolutely.
And,
those Disney classic heroines too. My goodness, with the Technicolor and the bright red lips. You've got Snow White, you've got Cinderella, you've got Sleeping Beauty. Yeah, those classic Disney movies had a big effect on me when I was a little girl, as far as a specific type of white beauty. And at the time, in the 1980s especially, like paleness, having a pale face, it wasn't really celebrated in Hollywood. It wasn't something that was as popular as being kind of sun-kissed or golden, as long as one was also Caucasian. I need to emphasize that. Like there was a weird type of whiteness being celebrated in the 1980s where being tan was good, but if you were white, right? And so I feel like as a little girl, I was absorbing really competing messages about what is beautiful. And I'm surely not the only one, right? And so that's something I thought about because I've always loved how red lipstick looks, but I have like a very pallid face, like unusually pale. Like, I think I joke that like, I wear SPF on a winter day, but that's true. I do wear SPF on a winter day. Like I'm a very pale gal. So I think that a red lip on a kind of ivory face, like there's something archetypal about it and celebrated, but that's not the only way of celebrating a red lip. Like red lipstick can look good on all sorts of women, but it can also mean something really different to different women. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to acknowledge. So even though I include my own story in the book, because I want people to understand how my experience of lipstick is shaped and contoured by my own story. I didn't want that to be the only story.
Yeah, I really appreciated that element of it. Sort of shifting, I was really interested in the way you traced the sort of different types of consumerism around lipstick, specifically the like femvertising that ends up happening and all the different iterations of that. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. There's a great book from 2016, We Were Feminist Once, From Riot Girl to Cover Girl. It's by Andy Ziesler. She founded Bitch Magazine, I think back in the 90s. This book is very informative, but also very entertaining. When I read it right when it came out. It really made me think about femvertising in a different way. I think I had been exposed to this type of advertising, and femvertising is essentially just any advertising or marketing that conflates femininity, specifically products that are connected to femininity, which are often beauty culture products, with empowerment, with agency, with liberation, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a very seductive message. Like, buy this and be empowered. Buy this, and you, in purchasing this and consuming this, you're doing something for yourself. And that in and of itself, that act of that act of consumption, of being a consumer is sufficient to somehow being a feminist, or to having some kind of activist engagement with the world. And so, first of all, I want to acknowledge that I don't think all femvertising is automatically nefarious and harmful. I think some marketing messages that I think are bound up in femvertising can actually encourage young girls or young women or even young boys to think about beauty culture in different ways that are not necessarily so limited and are not necessarily tied exclusively to heterosexual courtship or the idea of, appealing to a man, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that there are good things about certain types of femvertising, but at the same time, I'm wary of conflating choice feminism or like buying stuff. I'm wary of conflating any type of buying stuff with something that could be considered activist. I don't believe that. In addressing femvertising, so for example, Glossier was really fun, Keila, because Glossier is brilliant in terms of its marketing rhetoric, and a lot of its marketing rhetoric is really, it's subtly tied to specific forms of femvertising that would appeal to millennial women, especially in the 2010s. And this idea that like, you're not wearing lipstick to conform. You don't even have to wear makeup. Makeup is not something you need. But if you want to participate, here's what you can do. I also saw this with, I don't know if you're familiar with the Billy razors, like the shaving razors.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen one of those ads in a long time, but the ads were brilliant and actually very entertaining. But the message of the ad was so hilariously ironic because it was basically like, you might not like shaving at all. Maybe you never shave, but you only shave like this part of your body, or maybe you do this. And it showed all of these different people across gender identities, like with visible body hair, celebrating their body hair, which is great. I mean, I think that's great. In some ways, it felt like at the time it was jarring when I saw some of the Billy ads. But at the same time, at the same time, when the whole point is to say, buying this product, the product is for removing body hair. So I just found that, I mean, that's kind of bound up, and it's part of how femininity is so fraught. And the idea of shaping our appearance to be flattering or to be appealing or to stand out in the world, it's almost impossible to do that without people assuming that it's for male pleasure, that it's for male consumption, that it's capitulating to male priorities. And I think that that's where things actually get really interesting. And that's where I really hope people have what I like to call, kind, productive arguments. Like, it's okay to disagree. It's okay. Like, we can disagree with each other and we can share our experiences and hopefully learn from those experiences. So that would be something I would be so happy to hear if, like, someone reads my book and then shares it with their daughter or their niece or their mom. And then, they end up having productive disagreements.
I love a productive disagreement.
Yeah. Rather than like one that opens things up rather than shuts things down.
Kind of to wrap things up, I would love to hear you talk a little more about the narrative and like storyline that gets assigned so often to lipstick. I love that you brought up Chaperone's tiny desk and the like red lipstick on the teeth. That was so iconic. And then also, of course, her with the drag references and the constant celebration of drag, and then the movies and song. Like, I would just love to hear you talk a little bit.
There's so much to say about pop cultural representations of lipstick. In the chapter that I write about music videos specifically, I focused on female artists. I could have written about a lot of male artists who also incorporate lipstick into the kind of visual narrative that accompanies the music. But one of the things that is interesting about the women that I studied, and Chaperone is one of them, is how lipstick went from representing sexual allure within a heterosexual sphere, or even like cheating, the idea of like catching someone cheating because of seeing someone else's lipstick on the guy that you're with, like that idea of it being this telltale sign of cheating. I think that, I don't think that's completely gone away, but I do think that it's shifted. I don't think that lipstick any longer overtly represents that, especially to a lot of younger people. Chaperone's a great example of someone who really embraces lipstick as a way to hyperbolize and kind of embrace the more abject, disgusting aspects of like femininity in terms of just like what might repulse as well as appeal. And she does it so brazenly and so joyfully that I just find it visually delightful. And also the fact that she's so openly queer and also hyper feminine, I find really delightful. She's also from Missouri. She's from like rural Missouri. And the fact that she's adopting certain aesthetics from a very conservative Branson tradition, but then she's also tailoring them and shaping them in her own way. I'm not going to say that Chaperone is like completely uncomplicated. She's done some things that I understand some people would take issue with. But at the same time, on the whole, I think that the way she embraces lipstick is maybe evidence of how femininity is not addressed the same way or thought of in the same way by younger women or by younger people in general. And then that's a good thing. I don't know if I've necessarily addressed your question, but I think that, lipstick is always going to show up in pop culture because it's such a totemic object. It means so much. Even though it doesn't take up a lot of space and it's so recognizable. So yeah, if anything, I want people to think about it in a more complicated way. And I want people to think about also like larger systems of facial adornment or broader methods of facial adornment more deeply. Like, why do we have such suspicion of facial adornment and artifice in general? Like, where does that come from? What does it mean, for example, to look cheap? That's something, a lot of lipstick or bright lipstick, like the idea of looking cheap. What does that mean? So there are so many layers to that I think are worth investigating.
Oh, the way virtue and puritanical ideals are tied into all of it. 100%.
Yeah. There is so much puritanical history in the United States as far as aesthetics. It's not just lipstick. Like, the aesthetic of the United States is really complicated, like what kinds of aesthetics we value, how we interpret faces, how we interpret beauty. That's a whole other book. It's so complicated.
Please write it. I will read it.
Thank you.
Well, it has been such a true pleasure talking to you today.
Likewise. This was wonderful,
Thank you
Keila.
so much. I know you have a couple exciting events coming up. I would love for you to shout those out.
I would love to. So in addition to the lipstick book being available at SKYLIT Books, which I'm so excited about, I have a couple readings in March in Los Angeles. One is downtown. Actually, I'll do them in chronological order. The first one is March 20th at the Ripped Bodice bookstore, and that one's in Culver City. And that one is at 7 p.m. and is a fundraiser for an amazing organization called Altadena Girls. So if you buy a ticket, you get a copy of my book, but you also make a donation to Altadena Girls. And I will be speaking with an amazing performance artist, Siobhan O'Loughlin, about femininity, performance, politics, sexuality. So that's going to be amazing. That's March 20th, which is a Friday. And then at 3 p.m. on March 21st, I will be speaking with an amazing writer, Joanna Novak, at Art Book. Art Book is downtown in LA. So and that's at 3 p.m. in the afternoon.
Amazing. And then you are going to be going to AWP too.
Oh, that's right. Thank you so much for reminding me. So I will be in Baltimore in March as well, and I will be joined with 3 other amazing authors that are part of the Object Lesson series who have new books out. The 4 of us will be reading at Greedy Reads in Remington it's March 7th, which is a Saturday, and I believe that's at 7 p.m., 7 to 8:30 p.m., and it's an offsite AWP reading. So if you're going to AWP, you should totally go to this. It's free. It's going to be really fun. I will be reading, but I believe the other 3 books that will be shared are Ballot, Stock Photo, and I believe Saxophone. So really different types of objects.
Amazing. Ooh, I love the idea of those 4 objects together.
I know, right? What a great party. Yeah.
What a great party. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Keila. This was delightful. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the SKYLIT Books podcast series. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to check out the book featured in this episode, or others, please visit skylitbooks.com. If you're in the Los Angeles area, stop by for one of our live in-person author events. You can find a calendar on our website. If you like this podcast, leave us a review. It really helps us out. Our music is by Duck the Piano Wire. Till next time.